we are in a day and age where everything is online, social media, right? And there's a large branding component to standing out in business. Like, we know that we got to market, we got to put ourselves out there. And a lot of times people don't realize that the laws that impact the business structure, like LLC, corporation, contracts, right, are not the same as the ones that are for branding. So trademarks, copyrights, things like that. And there's an overlap that needs to happen. And oftentimes I'll find that people will focus on one and neglect the other, when you really need to, again, be doing your research to understand how all these different parts of the law interact in order to really have a tight foundation.
You're listening to the Black to Business Podcast, an educational podcast providing Black entrepreneurs with the tools and resources to start and grow their businesses. We chat with vetted Black entrepreneurs, thought leaders, and business owners as they provide tips and resources to help take your business to the next level. I'm your host, Monique T. Marshall. Welcome back to the Black to Business Podcast. I'm your host, Monique T. Marshall, and today we're breaking down one of the most important steps to building a resilient business, and that is building a strong legal and branding foundation to protect your business. As a Black entrepreneur, you're building something that's uniquely yours, and you deserve to protect it. From safeguarding your brand identity to making sure you are legally covered, these foundational steps aren't just nice to haves. They are essential moves that empower you to grow confidently and secure your hard work for the long term. Joining us is Temi Siyanbade, a business attorney and branding strategist who's dedicated to helping entrepreneurs like you establish a secure, lasting foundation. As the principal attorney at her Houston-based law firm and founder of Elevated Esquire, Temi brings a practical, accessible approach to legal topics that every business owner can benefit from. So in today's episode, she'll share key insights on selecting the right business structure, trademarking your brand, crafting essential contracts, and more. Steps that are critical for any industry. So if you're ready to take charge of your business's future and ensure it is protected, let's get into this episode. Temi, welcome to the Black to Business Podcast. It is a treat to have you on the show today to discuss all the things legally and setting your business up and your branded foundations up and protecting your business. So welcome to the Black to Business Podcast.
Thank you so much. I am so excited to be here. This is going to be a great conversation. I can feel it.
I can too. See, I love the energy already. So good. So before we dive into today's conversation, I always like to get my audience familiar with who we're speaking with. So if you could share a little bit about your journey, how did you get to where you are today in your business?
Awesome. Well, right now I am a business lawyer, but I haven't always been a business lawyer. I'm an educator, lifelong educator turned business lawyer. So I started my first career as a middle school teacher, and then went to law school. And here we are after working with different people in the community. I now support business people and help them navigate the legal world.
Yeah, I love that you said that, lifelong educator, and so glad that you are doing that and also doing what you're doing today. And as I mentioned, we're going to talk about understanding the importance of legal foundation. So let's start there. So Temi, can you start by explaining why it's so critical for early stage beginner entrepreneurs to establish that legal foundation right from the start?
Oh, well, that's a great question. Thanks for asking that. Honestly, people think that, well, when I think about different communities, and particularly Black communities and communities that have often been disenfranchised, we've usually been innovators and creators. And in creating and in innovating, we've often thought that that's where the rights that we have belong. But what I've learned over time is that it's not about creation, it's about ownership. And ownership is a matter of law. And so when we're talking about establishing a solid legal foundation from the start, it's about making sure you own what you create. And it's one of the areas that I think is often overlooked. And so how you start can impact how you finish. The things that you take for granted at the beginning can come back to bite you. And so that's one of the reasons why it's so critical for early stage entrepreneurs to really figure out, what is my initial foundation going to look like so that I can build well, essentially.
And I love that, the fact that you mentioned it is true. It's not about creation, it's about ownership. And yeah, that's what we want to make sure that we are doing. So thank you. And so, Tammy, a lot of people, of course, we hear about these terms like LLC, corporations, all of the different business structures. So if you could just like briefly describe like the different types of business structures that entrepreneurs should consider and how they'll impact their personal liability and taxes.
No, great. Another great question. And so when you're hearing, a lot of people, they start out their businesses and they ask a friend and say, okay, what should I do? You'll hear so many different things. And if you go
Mm-hmm.
online, you'll find a ton of different people, some legal professionals, most not, giving their 2 cents about what type of business structure you should consider, what type of business structure you should select. Well, the right one for you really depends on the type of business that you're selecting. Excuse
Mm-hmm.
me. In general, let's say you just decided that you were going to start a business tomorrow. You didn't want to file anything. You just wanted to go out and say, I'm Tammy. So maybe I'm doing Tammy's t-shirts, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not filing anything and I'm just starting my business. Well, I actually have already then selected a structure without knowing it. I've selected what we call a sole proprietorship. Now, it's the easiest to set up because there is no setup. You don't have to pay any money,
Mm-hmm.
but it's the most risky. And that's because you and your business are the same, right? So that means that your personal assets, the things that you own as a person, are on the line with anything that you do on your business. So if you decide to sign a contract, right, for a lease for a building, right, and you're unable to pay that, well, because everything is in one bucket, because you and your business are the same, your personal finances are now on the line if someone decides to sue you or if something happens. So easiest to form, but least amount of protection. And then when we're talking about taxes, you are required to pay what we call the self-employment tax. So I'll take a two-step detour, and I'm probably going into
Mm-hmm.
more detail than we need to, but I think it's helpful.
Yeah.
So when you are working for someone, right? Let's just talk about that. If we're an employee working for an employer, some of our paycheck is often taken away for taxes, right? So there's a payment of taxes that automatically happens. The
Mm-hmm.
same thing happens to your employer. They also are required to pay a certain amount of taxes. The amount together usually equals about 15.3%. When you are working for yourself, right, you are responsible now for that whole 15.3%. That's your self-employment tax. So as a sole proprietor who hasn't filed anything but is just out there doing business, you are responsible for that tax as a whole. So you're getting tax off the top and you have no protection. That's sole proprietorship.
Mm-hmm.
A second type of business structure that you could enter into is the partnership. And so when people are like, I'm a partner as a lawyer, like, I'm like, what do you mean? Because there's actually a legal definition behind that. And I think that's also one of the things that happens when we're talking about the law is that there's a way we think from a common sense perspective, the way the law is
Mm-hmm.
supposed to work. And then there's a way that the language in the law actually works. This is a really important thing to kind of understand when we're talking not just about business, but about the law in general. That you always want to go back and find out what does this mean under the law, like in this contract. What does this term mean in this contract? What does this term mean in the actual legislation? So when we're talking about partnerships from a legal perspective, there's a legal meaning, right, in terms of what it means for liability, and there's a legal meaning as to what it means for taxation. Now, I'm going to keep it pretty simple. I'm not going to go into too many of the nuances, but what I'll say is that we're talking about a partnership. That means two or more people are coming together for profit, right? There doesn't have to be a contract signed. There doesn't have to be anything formal. So it's just like the sole proprietor. But in this instance, there's more than one person. And so, just like your sole proprietorship, there is no limited liability. That means that let's say you get into, or let me use me as an example. I get into business with one of my siblings, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we don't have any contracts, but we haven't formed anything formally. And my sibling decides that, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and, buy a Ferrari for the business. All
Mm-hmm.
right. And I didn't sign off on that. But they decided to do that in the name of the business. Well, if we end up owing money on behalf of the business, or if something happens, there's an accident, my personal assets are now on the line, even though I didn't make that decision, because there is no limit to liability. So
Mm-hmm.
I like to bring this up. I like to talk about partnerships because I want people to be very careful when they start putting themselves out there as I'm in partnership with this person and they don't have an LLC, a corporation, or any type of structure in place that really protects them, and they have no contracts, no documents in place. All of those things are critical. Right. And so you're opening yourself up to lots of risk. And again, like we said, self-employment taxes, those come into play with your partnership as well. Okay. So those are two structures we discussed.
Those are the nitty gritty. And that's so good because I love the fact that you made it plain for people because it can be complicated. And
Absolutely.
yeah. And even so, with this, knowing the importance of this, there are still times where people are like, okay, I'd rather just skip it, or they have their pushback. There's some pushback there. So can you talk about the common misconceptions about setting up a business legally that you see amongst early stage entrepreneurs or beginner entrepreneurs?
So when it comes to discussing common misconceptions about setting up a business, what I see is a lot of people don't want to invest upfront. And so it's, when you're starting a business, sometimes you're thinking about how do I keep expenses down? And you're only thinking about some of the legal sides of the expenses as an expense instead of an investment. But I beg you to look at some of the entrepreneurs, particularly in the Black community that we value so much. I know sometimes we look at celebrities and we're like, oh, they're moving awesome. So I like to reference Beyonce because Beyonce doesn't play about the legal side of her business, right? So when it comes to setting things up before she starts, you will see her apply for trademarks. You will see her have her LLCs. You will see that she has her contracts. She does not play. And so when I'm talking to early stage entrepreneurs, I want you to think about the legal side of your business as an investment, not an expense. I want you to understand that choosing to pay to form an LLC or a corporation really protects your interest in the long run. And it's the type of investment that can make you multiples in the end if you structure it the right way, right? So it's really a mindset shift. I think there are also a lot of misconceptions about some of the structures. So, I mentioned LLC or corporation. One of the things I'll hear people say is, oh, I'm going to form an S Corp. Well, that's not a bad thing, but I want you to understand that an S corporation is not an entity structure. It's a way to be taxed. You still have to form an LLC or a corporation in order to basically request that you get the benefits of an S corporation. So not understanding some of those terms can mess you up because you think that you have one type of structure, but you don't. So you think you have these types of benefits, but you don't because you don't have the right thing in place. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it's really sometimes not allowing yourself it's making assumptions. I think that the biggest thing that a lot of entrepreneurs do is they think they know and they don't definitively find out. Stop making assumptions about the way you think the law works and find out for real what's actually happening. I think that's critical.
That's a bar right there. Noted. And so if you had to say, what is that simple, maybe first steps that a business owner should follow to ensure that their business is legally compliant?
Ooh, great question. Okay, so one of the first steps that you should do is I think doing research, right? So first and foremost, you got to figure out, and some of the stuff that you might need to put in place is going to differ depending on the industry that you're in. So certain industries are more regulated than other industries. If I'm creating invitations, that's not a highly regulated industry, but I still want to go back and do the research to find out what do people typically have in place for this type of business. If I'm starting a restaurant, that's a highly regulated industry. There are lots of licenses that are going to be necessary for me to be able to carry out that type of business. I need to make sure I have the right licenses in place. I need to find out what type of structure is going to really help me create separation between me and the business so that if something goes wrong with the business or if there's any type of risk with the business, it doesn't impact me personally. Right? So those are some of those things that you really want to make sure that you're researching, that you're seeking out counsel for. Just really, really, really important because again, the biggest mistake is assumptions. We don't want to do that. So we want to make sure that depending on our industry, we're doing the proper research to make sure that, oh, I understand I need this license, and this license, and that we're getting those things in order. I'll throw in one other one that I think happens, particularly in today's day and age. We are in a day and age where everything is online, social media, right? And there's a large branding component to standing out in business. Like we know that we got to market, we got to put ourselves out there. And a lot of times people don't realize that the laws that impact the business structure, like LLC, corporation, contracts, right, are not the same as the ones that are for branding. So trademarks, copyrights, things like that. And there's an overlap that needs to happen. And oftentimes I'll find that people will focus on one and neglect the other, when you really need to, again, be doing your research to understand how all these different parts of the law interact in order to really have a tight foundation.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow. I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because I would love to explore, like, what does the overlap look like, or what are some of the common themes that you see, especially when it comes to, as you mentioned, like Beyonce is always protecting trademarking before putting out anything, mostly. When people are thinking about going into trademarking, especially, as you mentioned, like for names, logos, and slogans, like what does that look like, and why is that even important?
Oh, beautiful. So one of the things that happens is sometimes people might try and like start their business and go to their state secretary of state website, right? And they look up the name of their business, or they look up the name of something, and they're like, oh, I looked it up. And they're like, oh, I'm good. I'm clear,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or they might go on social media and look at Instagram and say, oh, this handle is free. I'm good. I'm clear. Or they might be like, oh, I got this idea, and, my name is similar to this other person's, but I spell it with two T's. Like I spell Temi with two T's. They only got one. I'm good. All of those assumptions are incorrect.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things that is important to do is recognize that the portion of like starting your business, doing an LLC or a corporation, takes care of, I would say, like the body of the business, right? So what the business can own, what the business can sell, and things like that. But in terms of standing out in the marketplace, your trademarks are going to protect that. And the legal standard, right? The way that the law is measuring whether someone is okay or not okay is whether there is a likelihood of confusion. So that standard is it likely that someone else can be confused about who the source of this thing is?
Mm-hmm.
If there is a chance that that confusion can exist, the law is probably going to say that you cannot have exclusive rights to that name or that logo or that slogan and things like that. What does that mean for you? That means that if somebody else, it means two things. It could mean that you are accidentally copying somebody else who already has exclusive rights. Or it means that you can't stop other people from getting too close to you because what you have isn't distinct enough to enforce exclusive rights for yourself. And that's one of the things that you'll see Beyonce, like she doesn't play with. So I'll give you a quick story about Beyonce.
Mm-hmm.
Back in the day when I first started my practice, I used to work with a lot of folks who were in the wedding industry. And I went to one of these wedding bridal shows. I'm in Houston, so they have this big bridal extravaganza show. And I remember walking through the crowd and I saw all these shirts that said fiance. Well, I remember I didn't know what it was. It was really funny because I was like, huh? It was spelled FEYONCE. And so I was like, huh, this is really cute. And I was like, oh, that's a play on Beyonce's name. But everybody had it. Like all the brides that year were rocking this shirt. A few months later, I go and I look up this company and I realize that this company doesn't exist anymore. And I was like, what happened? And I went back and I realized that they were hit with a cease and desist from none other than the Queen Bee. Because the existence of their business name could look like Beyonce was the source of that. Yeah. It could look like she endorsed that. And she's built her brand. She has built her business. If you have someone who could look like they're the source of something that you create, like they could look like they're the source, or if you have something that confuses that source information, what if they go out and the quality is not to the same standard that you would have it? Now your brand is being tarnished, right? And you have no control over that. So that's one of the reasons why you'll see trademark owners stop other people who are too close to comfort. The other reason is, let's say you have become a loyal enthusiast for a particular brand and you love working with them, you love them, and you find someone and you don't realize that that's not the person you wanted to do business with. Now, the
Mm-hmm.
person who has done all of that work to build a brand is not getting the benefit of that, and someone else is benefiting from their hard work. So those are some of the ways that you'll see trademark, like learning how to really protect your trademarks, how it's good for you and your customers, so that they know that you are the exclusive source of this thing, and they know that nobody else is infringing on that space. But if you don't do the work to protect that, to like identify what your domain is, you're not going to be able to protect that exclusivity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, such a good perspective. And I love that you gave that example because sometimes it's like we don't think in that way. And like you mentioned even earlier, like thinking in terms of how the law would think. So,
Yeah.
so key.
And and for me,
Mm-hmm.
I'm really passionate about sharing that because I know that I work with people who invest in their brands, and I
Mm-hmm.
would never want them to have someone else undermine the investment that they've made with me or in time or energy. Like business owners be promoting, folks
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
work hard to stand out. You don't do it overnight. You do a lot of work to make sure you're showing up on social, to make sure you're putting out ads, to make sure you're having the conversations, and to have someone else come and benefit from your hard work. I don't like it for my clients. So I'm very big on people recognizing the other side, because I feel like a lot of times people might be on the flip side where it's like you're a
Mm-hmm.
smaller business and you're like, well, I didn't mean to like copy this person. And why is this big business, looking down on me? I don't think it's always about that. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And from a market perspective, you want your brand to be so distinct. You want to stand out so much because you know what you're going to bring to it that you don't want to be close to anybody else who exists.
Right.
Right. So like, it's really important to be like, no, I want my own ground to be so clear. I don't want them to confuse me with Beyonce because I'm doing my own thing, you
Right.
know?
Not even confuse me with Beyonce.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
I
true.
admire her. I'm great, but I'm me.
You know what I mean? And I worked hard.
Yes.
Yes, that is so true. And Tammy, the other thing that you mentioned is the investment of just the importance of looking at it, and this is an investment in your business. And I want to talk about what this means because one of the other things that I love that you do is you place an emphasis on legally protecting your business, but also from a branding perspective as well. And so I want to talk about how trademark protection strengthens a brand and adds that value to a business in the long run.
Yes. This is where I want people to be, honestly. Like with this question that you asked is where I'm hoping for all my clients, all the people who are listening. I want you to be strategically thinking about the assets in terms of the intellectual property, because that's the world we're living in right now. So I'm gonna answer your question, but I'm gonna start by talking about some of the big brands that we know. When we talk
Okay.
about Google, when we talk about Amazon, when we talk about all these tech companies, most of the time, these companies, it's their brand that's more valuable than the technology and the actual physical assets that they have. And it's because they've invested in those brands, right? So what does that mean for us? When you are able to say, okay, I'm going to spend money registering a trademark, you are now opening up yourself to be able to do what I call licensing. Right. So you will maintain ownership of what you own, but you can enter into partnerships with other people and say, you can use or leverage what I've invested in, but I will always retain ownership.
Mm-hmm.
That is strategic thinking. We're not doing things the way everybody else has done it anymore. And that's one area I think a lot of creators and owners and innovators kind of lose sight, is that, again, you create things, but you're not usually able to leverage what you own because you haven't created the legal structure around it to show that you own this. So when you see like partnerships, for example, like you might see Puma partner with another brand, it's because that brand has done the legal work to create a structure, almost like a box around what they own, using a trademark or using a copyright or using an LLC or a combination of all those different things. And if that's what you want to do as a business, like that opens up, again, those opportunities for licensing, opens up opportunities for partnerships where you're able to enter into arrangements with other people, but you don't lose what you own. And then at the end of the day, if you wanted to sell it, you would be able to say that not only do you get the technological components of what I've had, my business, maybe my contact list or my technology, but you also get my brand value. And usually, again, if you've marketed, if you've pushed your business, that in and of itself is another additional value that you can give. But if you haven't put that thing in a trademark, if you haven't put that in some type of structure, you can't leverage that for sale. You can't leverage that for licensing. You can't leverage that for partnerships. It's just there and it's kind of dormant, and you're not getting the full benefit of what you've actually created.
Mm-hmm. This is such an eye-opening conversation. See, that's why we have the experts like you on here. Temi, I love it. Because it's giving all the ways that you can look at it. And it's like thinking about, okay, this is long-term. And this is, like you mentioned in the beginning, this is that ownership piece of things. And we can really leverage our brand. So I'm learning so much already.
Good.
And so I want to talk about also, so we've talked about the trademarking process. So someone who is listening, they're thinking, okay, what are the steps to get started? So what advice would you give to those entrepreneurs in the basic steps involved in the trademarking process?
All right. Number one, most important is you have to do a search. You have to do a search, and not just a basic search. So one of the things, again, people think that it's like, oh, I talked about the likelihood of confusion standard. So this is an area that people mistaken. You think that, or a lot of people tend to think that it's easy to distinguish yourself in terms of that standard. Like if I have, again, 2 T's and the other one just has T, then that might be different. But that's usually not enough from a legal perspective. And so a proper search at the beginning allows you to look at your particular industry or whatever it is that you're selling and see all the different types of names or logos or slogans that exist that might be somewhat similar to you. So that might mean similar in sound. Like if they sound similar, even if they're spelled completely different, that might be an issue. If they look similar, even if they're spelled completely different, but there's something about the visuals that look similar, that might be a likelihood of confusion issue, right? And so you're not aware of that unless you do a search. And you need to do a search of the trademark USPTO sites. You should also do one of domains. You should also do one of social media handles, right? And so when you're able to work with an expert, sometimes they're able to do a broad search for you of all the similarities. And sometimes I like to find I like to bring about some of the areas that people might not realize that there might be a similarity. So for example, there was a time where there was a hotel that tried to do mixed sleep, right, for their hotel. And they weren't affiliated with McDonald's. And McDonald's was able to say, no, that's too similar because people are going to think that this is an extension of McDonald's. Even though McSleep is clearly very different from McDonald's, it was still too close. Right. So it's not until you do a really thorough search. It also might be a spelling thing. So I had one client that it was their mark had one letter different from someone else. And so the United States Patent and Trademark Office was like, ooh, that might be too similar. Now we were able to overcome it because we were able to go back and do some additional research to distinguish them. But we would not be able to do that or navigate that if there was not a search. So first step, always, before you invest in getting your business card, before you invest in your pretty website, before you invest in all the different things like you're spending money, you want to do the search. I'm going to lean into it even a little bit more about that, because what ends up happening, and I've had people who have come to my office with this, is you invest in the business card, you invest in the website, you invest in the marketing, you start getting some traction. And then a few months down the line, you get hit with a cease and desist letter. And then you want to go back and do the research, and it's too late. I hate having to tell people, well, no, you're going to have to rebrand. You are in their space. They have their trademark. They've secured that, and you will lose this argument in court. Right? So you want to do the search before you start investing in all these other things. It's critical.
Yeah. And you know what? Another thing it makes me think about is that emotional investment. If you go and do all this work and you haven't done that search, and it's just like you get attached to this name or this thing. And so it's like you're saying, just do the work up front.
Yes, exactly. And again, and then when you think about it from a business perspective, like sometimes when you don't do that search up front, you don't realize you think you're the only person who had that idea. You do that, you get that emotional investment. But then when you get that cease and desist letter, that's telling you that there is someone else that your consumers could mistaken you for as well.
Right.
Like that's another perspective to realize, is that, oh, that means that my stuff isn't as distinct as I want it to be. And is that helping the people who are growing to fall in love with my brand? Is that going to help them find me? No. So then you have to do the emotional work of like, oh my God, I got to come up with a different name, another logo and all that stuff. And it's painful. I've talked to people through it, and I know it's not fun.
Yeah. So yeah, listen to Temi. So, and Tammy, one of the things that you mentioned, you've given us a lot of examples, which I love. And this makes me think about how can entrepreneurs strategically begin to build their own brand identity that's both legally protected and also distinct in the marketplace.
Yeah, so I think, it all goes back to that search. When you are starting to have ideas, you can do some initial preliminary searches, and of course, and then you eventually should invest in a more comprehensive one. But once you have done that, when you invest in getting like a trademark, you are now giving yourself an exclusive right to use this. I will throw out one specific strategy, and it might be a little bit more advanced, but I think it's helpful for people to know. There's something called an intent to use trademark application. This trademark application is one that you can submit before you have created your business, essentially. And it establishes the fact that you intend to use this mark. But what does it do? If you go through the process of doing all the application stuff and securing this intent to use, you'll be able to have a registered R trademark before you've started promoting yourself. So the moment you launch your business, you have the exclusivity to stop other people who might be inspired by your name to do something similar. And you can shut that down from the beginning. Now, that's one strategy that you can use in order to kind of like make sure you're setting yourself up from a marketing perspective to really launch forward without any fear. Because sometimes what I'll have is people will wait until they've started, because of the finances or whatever, maybe they're not aware, they'll wait and they'll start getting a lot of traction with their business, right? And then want to go back and say, okay, now it's time for me to get a trademark. Well, the trademark process can take up to a year plus some, right? Depending on how there is no expedited version. So let me tell you a quick story to kind of depict one of the things. Yeah. So I had a client who they were starting their process. They were starting their business, and they had been dragging their feet. I had done some more business stuff, but they had been dragging their feet on the trademark stuff. And I could see the traction they were getting. I was like, this business is going to be one that people want to copy. So I put my foot down with the client. I said, listen, I love my clients. I said, listen, you need to do your trademarks now. I was like, give me the information, but we need to figure out a way. We might not be able to do all the trademarks, but we need to be strategic and at least do a few to get you a strong foothold from a legal side so that you can shut other people who might want to copy you down. So the client luckily listened to me, and we went forward and we did that, and they eventually got that trademark. Now, again, that process takes up to a year. So they're still slowly building their business while we're going through the trademark process. But by the time they got registered, right, they started getting all those copycats, and they came back to me. They're like, "Baby, thank you so much." The second thing that happened is when because they had grown, they were in a place where they could invest in more trademarks. So we went back to invest in additional ones, because again, we're being strategic about how do we claim territory. And so when we did that, we ran into an office action. Now, an office action is essentially an initial denial, and it says that, oh, you can't because something is ahead of you. When we went back and we looked, it was another mark was applying for a trademark in the same category that they had earlier applied to. Now, luckily, because we had already secured their first trademark, that new mark was now responding to an office action about my client's trademark. So we could sit pretty because I was like, oh, you're going to lose because we already got this.
Right.
And that's what happened. That other person wasn't able to go forward. And so then we were able to go back and now secure additional territory because we had been strategic in our approach. So we were able to enforce exclusivity to stop other people, but then also open up a pathway for them to continue to have more terrain in the future. So it's really a strategic move.
Yes, that's such a great story and example also, because you spoke about how like even some people are thinking, I got to do all this. I know I need to do this up front, but how much of it do I need to do up front? And how you're saying like you can prepare this at least. And then as you continue to grow and expand, you can come back and do this part of it.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, because one of the things I'll say about trademarks is you get a trademark in a particular class of goods or services. Like there's a whole bunch of different categories. So my example that I always like to throw out there is, there's Delta Airlines and there's Delta Faucets. Those two can coexist because they're in two such different worlds. You get to identify the world that you want to have your domain in by registering a trademark. So one of the strategic decisions that we do is, and that you will have to make is what class do I want to own first, right? I might not own all of them, but there might be some that are better ones to get me a foot in the door that I can make a decision about. And so we go through that with our clients. It's like, oh, okay, like this is the best one to do now. If you can do two, let's do this, because everybody is kind of doing, you have to move according to what is best for you and your business at the time. Like not as much as we like Beyonce, we can't necessarily like register 15 different trademarks at once like Beyonce can. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
That's just real talk. And that's okay. But what can you start working on? If you can't even register the trademark up front, I think at least like do it again, that search, because at least you know what's out there. Right. So I do that with LLC owners. I'm like, okay, you might not be able to do a trademark right now, but I want you to know that in the trademark world, this is what exists. Do you still want to move forward with this, knowing that this is what exists in the world? Or do you need to re-strategize right now? So it's a very strategic, or that's the approach we need to be taking. I don't think people are strategic with how they navigate some of these things.
Certainly. And I agree. And Temi, one of the things, as I mentioned before, is like you've given us some great stories. And I love that. It's great. It's putting it into perspective. And so speaking of that, in your experience, how does storytelling contribute to a memorable brand? And are there legal ways to protect those brand stories?
Oh, whoa. Beautiful question. I think storytelling, beyond, storytelling is what makes the human race kind of connect. We all connect with stories. And I think it's important for us to kind of remember that our stories are like kind of our lifeblood. Even for someone like me, like I like to try and keep things very technical, very law, very because that's a safe, comfortable place. But at the end of the day, the thing that distinguishes all of us is really how we connect with the people we want to serve. Unless we're selling a commodity, and even people who sell commodities still have stories that they're telling. We have to be telling stories. And so your stories can be captured in so many different ways. And all the different ways you tell those stories, there's usually a legal component that you can leverage to protect it. Now, we don't necessarily do enough work to look at what those different legal tools might be. But like we said, a trademark is a legal tool to leverage in order to protect the stories that your visuals might tell if you have a logo, the phrases that you use if you have a slogan, your name, like all those things are telling stories. Let's say you have actual stories that you are telling, maybe through jingles, like maybe you have a theme song. You can leverage copyright in order to protect that story. If you are actually crafting stories, right? Like you're writing books to put your ideas out in the world, tools like copyrights and registering those are different tools, again, you leverage to protect that. And the more you implement that, the more you put those protections in place, the more you are able to do two things. Again, you're able to protect your exclusivity by stopping other people, and you're able to forge a path forward for you, right? So like you're able to say, okay, I'm putting this out there without fear. I've talked to people who are scared to put their ideas out into the world because they're like, I'm scared I'm going to be copied. If you use these other tools that are here, you don't have as much fear because you've gotten the law on your side, where you're like, I can put my book out there and I can know that, nobody can copy my words word for word because I got that copyright protection already registered, not just, assumed, but it's there on the books. So I won't have to, and I guess I should also say two quick things. When we're talking about enforcing your rights, whether it be trademark, copyrights, business rights, all of these other things, most of the legal systems that are in place in the world won't let you enforce those rights until you have figured out a way to be registered with them. So, for example, if I'm doing business in another state, right, and someone does wrong in that state and I want to sue them in that state, if I have not properly registered to do business in that state according to that state's law, I'm not going to be able to bring a lawsuit in that state because I won't have jurisdiction. That's one example. If someone infringes on my trademark and I want to sue them, and it's like I have the resources and the ability to sue them, I can't bring a lawsuit in the United States federal court until I have registered a trademark. The same can be true for your copyrights. The same can be true for your patents. So you are like, I remember talking to one of my clients and she was telling me it encouraged me and it changed my perspective. She was like, I'm invested in my trademark because I believe in my business. I believe that my this is going to make a difference. I believe that it's going to stand out. And so those were all the kind of things that she would like you invested because you believe that you're not going to stay small. You believe that you're actually going to, do something with whatever it is that you're creating. And I think I deviated from the question a little bit.
No, that was powerful. That's powerful. Yeah. You invested because you believe that you're not going to stay small. That was a word. Yeah. So Temi, you have been giving us words throughout this entire conversation. And now I want to shift gears and talk about even more about the work that you are doing and to continue support. So what resources would you recommend for entrepreneurs who are looking to strengthen their legal and branding foundations?
All right. So the first thing I'm going to tell you, there's a spectrum, right? And so, I work with businesses at all stages. So I know that sometimes you ain't got no money. Research. And so I've made the tools available for free via YouTube. I have a YouTube channel that I consistently put out new videos where I'm talking about stuff like this all the time. At least start there. Like, please, it's free. Please, yes. I'm not charging you my usual hourly for this. It's free. It's there. Go there, leverage that. Law libraries in your community, like they got those tools. NOLO, it's a series of books. It's all about doing law yourself. Those books are actually really good, right? So if you want to spend a little bit more money or go to the library, you don't even have to spend money. I know we don't go to the library like we used to. I love the library. Go to the library. Yeah, pull up one of those books. They will give you a solid foundation and really reaffirm some of the things that I'm saying here and really allow you to go a little bit deeper. Then after that, to be really strategic, again, if you want to invest with working with someone like me, like you could go to my website, you could find something and you could schedule an appointment with me and we'll sit down, we'll talk specifics. Then I can ask you questions about what you're doing, what you're navigating and kind of give you some resources there. Again, and it's not just me, like legal professionals all over. Like I'm licensed in Texas, but I know you've had some of my colleagues on here. So you have a ton of different people. Like there are people out there who are creating content, who are putting out information. And then when you're ready to invest in that, they're there to support you, right? So you want to make sure that you are leveraging that to the extent that is possible. And then again, you want to make sure that you are investing in not just, again, the protection up front, but being vigilant about your brand. So there are resources. I do this with my clients, but there are also additional resources that you might find that do some brand monitoring for you as well. Like you want to know everywhere your brand is being mentioned or something similar so that you can either be like, yay, go me, or be like, who's trying to copy me and shut it down?
Yes.
Right? So you want to invest in things like that. So there are tools that you might find with some of the business directories that could kind of help you. I would also say that when you're looking for advisors, again, things like SCORE, they have some really good advisors all over the nation that you can talk to. But you really need to push back against assumptions and assume that you have a misunderstanding. There's nothing wrong with getting clarity, right? And asking for like some more certainty about things by doing the research or talking to the professionals. And so I think those are a few resources that I think, in terms of just even from my side, from a legal perspective, that I think are super valuable.
Yeah. And Temi, I would love to talk more about the process of working with you. So are there specific things that you work with clients on, different programs and things like that? So if they're interested, what does that process look like?
Beautiful. So I do. So I have initial consultations that people schedule just to get some initial clarity if they're starting out, and they might not be able to move forward and get specific services. But then sometimes there are people who are able to do specific services. So we'll help you with formation of your business. We help you with restructuring. One of the things that I have found too is that sometimes people start one way, but they need to restructure in order to better protect their assets. You have families that you are wanting to protect your legacy regarding and trying to make sure that the way that you've structured your business supports that. We help with that. So we'll do business succession planning or estate planning to navigate that. One of the other things that we do, I call it the ICE method. So whenever you come to a consultation, we're talking to you about your intellectual property, that's for I. We're talking about your contracts, that's C. And we're talking about your entity, that's E. We talk about the three of those and try and figure out, okay, what's the best structure for where your business is as well as where your business wants to go. And those different types of services are different packages. Our standard package that a lot of people end up doing is something called the launched and loaded package, which is usually a combination of those three different things. But we also have a la carte options. And then for our businesses that are more established, we don't offer this to everyone, but I'm just sharing it because it's one of the things that we do. For our businesses that are more established, we do have subscription services where we can be your attorney for, the year. And you just know that we're reviewing your contracts on a regular basis. We're having strategy sessions on a regular basis. You're having access to our additional resources. And I also like to do different events. So one of the things that I'm doing soon, I'll be, talking about that, is just end of the year events in terms of both mindset and legal. Like, what does my mind need to be as I'm ending 2024 and I'm going into 2025? Or what do I need to make sure I have in place from a legal perspective? Like, there are new laws in place. Have I complied with that? We'll do periodic webinars or, YouTube streams to just put that information out there because we want people to be informed. I think at the beginning, remember I said I was an educator like that.
Yes.
I'm a lifelong educator. So I can't help but teach. Even when I'm talking about the law, like, I'm going to teach you, but I'm also going to do the things in place. So you'll always get that from me.
We can definitely tell throughout the conversation. And that's what we love on Black to Business. We love people like you. So yes, we love it. We don't mind it. And speaking of, so how can people continue to connect with you, find you, and support you?
All right. Well, the handle across the board is TOS Legal. So if you go on Instagram, TOS Legal, you'll find me. If you go to youtube.com/@TOS Legal, you'll find me. If you're on Instagram, even though I'm bigger on YouTube, like I do a lot more on YouTube, but YouTube will be the best platform. And then my website is www.toslegal.com. And that's for legal services. I got a couple of other things coming up eventually, but that's where Yeah, like for my lawyers, I actually got some things in the works for them, and just there's a whole lot. But TOS Legal for now will get you connected so that you'll hear the different whispers and the things coming down the pipeline.
We love it. And as you mentioned, like, you love to educate. And speaking of lawyers help, I have to mention that you are, in addition to these things, you are an author as well. So you have a book, How Lawyers Can Use Video to Stand Out, Create More Value, and Revolutionize their firms. Can you tell us a little bit about the book and what can people get from the book?
Oh, absolutely. So this book came from, when I started my practice, I was one of the few people who was leveraging video to really connect with people. I was like, wait, people are using video in other industries. We're not doing this in the law. So I would do that. And then I got asked to speak at different conferences to talk to lawyers about using video. And eventually the American Bar Association approached me and said, will you write a book about it? And so Show Don't Tell is that book. And I mean, it's people who are non-lawyers can definitely benefit from it. But I do have some things that are specific to lawyers, because one of the things I also like to tell people about lawyers is sometimes when lawyers are tight-lipped, it's not because we don't want to share. It's because we have really interesting rules that govern how we connect with people. And so the book talks about that and gives some insight for people who are in the legal profession as to how to navigate it. But it also goes into the technical elements of, like, this is the type of tools that I use in terms of creating my videos. This is how my process, what it looks like. This is how I outsource. This is how I think about ideas, right? This is how other people have thought about ideas. This is how you can navigate that. And that's what Show Don't Tell does. So I'm really excited about that book. It should be released at the end of this year or the beginning of next year. It's coming out soon. And then I'm already thinking about my next project, and I'm really excited about that. Oh yeah, because that one is going to be broader. It's not going to just be about lawyers. It's. I haven't decided exactly how I want to entitle it, but I've realized that there's so many people who are scared to kind of like step out into leadership and own the spaces that were like designated for them. And it's a battle that I have faced. Like, people see me doing my videos and see me reaching out. They're like, "Oh, Temi, you're never scared." I'm like, please, if you only know the conversations I have with my family and my therapist, boy, you would know. You know what I'm trying to overcome. And I just want to encourage us, because, like, even though it's scary to put yourself out there, right? Like, me putting myself out here is scary, but I know that I'm helping at least one person. And there's so many other people who need to put themselves out there. Like, I'm glad, like, someone like you, Monique, you put yourself out there because you're helping so many people, and nobody knows what your secret struggle might be for you, and there's probably even more that you can step out into, right? And all of us need to step out even more into those spaces and those places, because it's not just about us, right? It's also about the impact we can lead. So that's the next project, and that's like my heart project.
Well, I will definitely, because I'm like, oh, this is a whole word right here. So I'm definitely going to be tuned into that as well, because you are so right. It's like, it's bigger than us, in that I know that I'm going to be able to help this person get their breakthrough. So I have to get over myself, and, like you said, show don't tell. So I love that. Love it. We're excited for you. I'm excited for your journey. And I'm excited that you have been on the Black to Business podcast. And we can say she stepped on the Black to Business podcast. Okay.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. Thank you for this platform, and thank you for your amazing questions. Like, I know so many people are going to be, have already been blessed by this, and will continue to be blessed by this platform. So thank you for having me.
You're welcome, Temi. So as we come to the close of today's conversation, I have to say how much I really appreciated Temi's passion for teaching and really breaking down the essentials. Her lifelong commitment to educating really shined through today in this conversation, with so many valuable examples that made these legal and branding concepts clear and accessible. In this episode, we explore the key concepts to creating a solid legal and branding foundation, from really understanding which business structure suits you best to protecting your brand with trademarks and essential contracts. And Temi gave us the tools to secure and grow your business confidently, which I truly love. Her insights really showed us that protecting your business isn't just about avoiding risk, it's really about setting yourself up for a lasting success. So I want to thank you so much for being a part of the Black to Business family. And let's keep building and let's keep pushing the culture forward. And also let's keep making businesses that last and make sure that our hard work is protected. So for more resources mentioned in today's episode, as well as to learn more about Temi, head over to blacktobusiness.com/226. And also make sure to join us again next week for another amazing episode. But until then, keep building and keep protecting. And I will see you next week, same time, same place. Later.